The galaxy was vast, its corners mapped and conquered by a coalition of alien civilizations bound by a tenuous peace. Amid this fragile unity, one immutable rule echoed across star systems, whispered in council chambers, and etched into the annals of history. Do not disturb the humans. No one truly remembered who first uttered the warning or why, but the fear of humanity's potential kept it alive. They were a species whose brilliance and brutality had carved a path through the stars before they disappeared into a self-imposed slumber, their ships drifting silently like tombs. For centuries, the rule stood unchallenged, a testament to the galaxy's caution. Yet, aboard the research frigate Elysian, Captain Zarek sat at the edge of breaking it. His orange-tinted scales gleamed under the sterile light of the command deck as he stared at the holographic display in front of him. The dormant human vessel floated in the void, silent and imposing, its ancient design a stark contrast to the sleek alien ships surrounding it. "We've been circling this derelict for weeks," Zarek muttered, his voice carrying a mix of impatience and curiosity. "We know their technology surpasses ours. Why should we let it rot when it could be ours to study?" Dr. Corvin, seated at the console beside him, folded his wiry arms. The scientist elongated, insectoid features twitched with unease. "Because it is forbidden," Corvin said, his voice clipped but resolute. The coalition agreed. Humans chose isolation. We have no right to interfere. Rights? Zarek scoffed, his amber eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Corvin, what kind of species voluntarily vanishes after achieving dominion over the stars? It's cowardice. Myth. They're not gods. They're just gone." Behind him, Lieutenant Jarek adjusted his weapon holster, a subtle movement that betrayed his growing tension. The hulking warrior had always been loyal to Zarek, but the human vessel unnerved him in ways he couldn't articulate. He finally broke his silence. "Captain," Jarek rumbled, his deep voice steady, "even if they're not gods, they're dangerous. There are records, entire fleets lost when they cross the humans. It's not fear that stops us. It's survival." Zarek waved him off. "Enough with the cautionary tales. We'll send a probe. No contact. Just observation." He turned back to the hologram, his mind already racing. Corvin stiffened. "And if that wakes them?" "It won't," Zarek said, brushing off the warning. "We're explorers, not cowards." Reluctantly, Corvin initiated the probe's launch. The small, orb-like device slid from the frigate's hull, gliding toward the human ship. It was a relic of war, its blackened exterior marred by centuries of wear. Corvin monitored the probe's progress, antennae twitching nervously as it neared the vessel's surface. Then, the ship responded. Without warning, the human craft emitted a low hum, a vibration that resonated through space and into the Elysian. Lights flickered across its hull, pale and cold, as dormant systems roared to life. The probe disintegrated in an instant, reduced to molten slag by an unseen force. On the Elysian's deck, alarms blared and chaos erupted. Corvin's claws danced over his console as he tried to contain the escalating system's breach. "You've done it," he shouted, his voice high-pitched with panic. "They're waking." Zarek stood frozen for a moment, his confidence shattered as the reality of his actions sank in. "Jarek," he barked, regaining his composure. "Prepare the crew." "Corvin, shut it down." "I can't." Corvin snapped. "Their systems are decades ahead of ours. We're locked out." A transmission cut through the chaos. It was garbled at first, the language ancient and guttural, but then it became clear. A single, human voice. Male, commanding. "Who dares disturb our rest?" The voice was cold, devoid of emotion, yet it carried an authority that silenced the bridge. Zarek hesitated, his bravado faltering as the realization of his folly bore down on him. Jarek stepped forward, his posture firm. "This is Captain Zarek of the Elysian. We meant no harm. You violated our sanctuary." The voice interrupted, cutting through the lieutenant's measured words like a blade. "You will answer for it." Before anyone could respond, the human ship pulsed with energy. A beam of light arced out, connecting with the Elysian. Systems overloaded, screens flickered, and the one sterile command deck was plunged into dim emergency lighting. Corvin slumped in his chair, his limbs trembling. "They've taken control. We're defenseless." Zarek clenched his fists, his pride warring with the primal fear rising within him. "No," he muttered, almost to himself. "We've come too far to retreat. Prepare to board their vessel." Jarek turned to his captain, disbelief etched on his broad face. "Boarding? Captain, they'll annihilate us before we set foot inside." "We don't have a choice," Zarek snapped. "If we leave now, the Coalition will brand us cowards, or worse. We face them on our terms, not theirs." As the crew reluctantly prepared for the boarding mission, the human ship's voice echoed once more, this time softer, almost mocking. "You seek to challenge what you do not understand. So be it. Welcome to humanity's legacy." Zarek gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening even as fear gnawed at him. The line had been crossed. Whatever awaited them aboard the human ship, there was no turning back now. The boarding party moved cautiously through the cold, silent corridors of the human vessel. Their boots echoed faintly against the metallic floor, the sound swallowed by the oppressive stillness. Captain Zarek led the group, his jaw clenched and his pride keeping his fear at bay. Behind him, Lieutenant Jarek carried his plasma rifle at the ready, scanning every shadow. Dr. Corvin followed reluctantly, his long, spindly legs quivering with each step. The air was thick, almost tangible, as if the very ship exhaled an ancient warning. The walls pulsed faintly with light, organic patterns swirling across their surface as if alive. Corvin trailed his claws across them, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't just a ship. It's alive in some way. Their technology is more advanced than we ever imagined. Focus, Corvin, Zarek snapped. Find the core systems. If we control them, we control the ship. But even as he spoke, his words rang hollow. This was no ordinary derelict. It wasn't something to be controlled. It was something to be survived. Ahead, a door hissed open, revealing a vast chamber bathed in dim, golden light. The boarding team hesitated at the threshold. At the center of the room, encased in a glass pod, lay the figure of a man. He was tall, his body encased in armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Even in stasis, his presence radiated an unsettling authority. Zarek approached cautiously, his breath shallow as he gazed at the figure. "Is this what we woke?" he murmured. Corvin adjusted his scanner, his antennae twitching furiously. "This is no ordinary human," he said, his voice trembling. "The energy signature, it's off the charts. He's been enhanced biologically, technologically. They didn't just sleep, they evolved." Before Zarek could respond, the glass cracked with a deafening hiss. The team stumbled back as the pod released its occupant. The human's eyes snapped open, cold, calculating, and disturbingly lucid. He stepped out of the pod, his movements fluid and precise, as if waking from a brief nap rather than centuries of stasis. The silence stretched as the human scanned the group. His gaze lingered on each of them, assessing, dissecting, and dismissing. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and calm, yet brimming with quiet menace. "Which of you is responsible?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Zarek forced himself to step forward, though his legs felt like lead. "I am Captain Zarek of the Elysian," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "We meant no harm." The human's hand shot out, and Zarek froze as he felt an invisible force constrict his throat. The man hadn't moved an inch, yet Zarek was lifted off the ground, gasping for air. "No harm," the human said, his tone icy. "You trespassed. You defiled what you don't understand. Do you think your ignorance absolves you?" Jarek raised his rifle, aiming at the human. But before he could fire, the weapon was torn from his hands by an unseen force. It crumbled into a useless heap at the human's feet. The human turned his attention to Jarek, releasing Zarek, who collapsed to the ground, coughing. "You," he said, stepping closer to the lieutenant. "A soldier. You understand consequence, don't you?" Jarek met the human's gaze, his hands clenching into fists. "We didn't come to fight," he said firmly, "but we will defend ourselves." A flicker of amusement crossed the human's face, but it was fleeting. "Defend yourselves? Against me?" He glanced at the shattered remains of the rifle. "How?" Corvin, trembling but determined, stepped forward. "You misunderstand us," he said, his voice shaking. "This wasn't an act of aggression. We sought to understand you, to learn." The human's gaze shifted to the scientist, and for a moment his expression softened, though it was still unreadable. "Learn," he repeated. "Do you learn by tearing open ancient wounds? By waking a force you cannot control?" "We didn't know," Corvin said desperately. "We didn't know what you were." The human fell silent, his eyes narrowing as he studied the group once more. "No," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "You didn't know. But ignorance is not innocence." Zarek, still recovering, managed to rise to his feet. "If you're going to kill us," he said, forcing his voice to steady, "just do it. But understand this. You're awake now. The galaxy will know. They'll fear you." The human tilted his head, as if considering Zarek's words. Then he turned, walking toward a console that lit up at his approach. His fingers danced over the controls, and the ship hummed to life around them. "I do not need fear," the human said without looking back. "I need understanding. And now that I'm awake, the galaxy will give it to me." Corvin stepped forward, daring to speak again. "Who are you?" he asked. The human paused, his hand hovering over the console. He turned slowly, his gaze piercing. "I am Commander Dax," he said simply, "and you've made a grave mistake." Before anyone could respond, the ship shifted, its walls pulsing with energy. A beam of light surrounded Dax, and he vanished, leaving the boarding team alone in the vast, golden chamber. Zarek staggered back, his mind racing. "We need to get off this ship," he said. "Now?" Jarek nodded, his jaw tight. "And what then?" "We warn them," Zarek said grimly. "The Coalition needs to know what's coming." As they turned to leave, the ship's voice, Dax's voice, echoed around them. "Run if you wish. It won't change what's already begun." The team hurried back to their own vessel, the weight of their actions pressing down on them. They had woken something ancient and powerful, and as the human ship loomed behind them, silent once more, they knew the galaxy would never be the same. The Elysian's engines roared as it sped away from the human ship, the crew scrambling to piece together what little remained of their confidence. Captain Zarek stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the edge of the control panel, as if it might steady the chaos raging in his mind. He stared at the monitor displaying the human vessel, now quiet and distant, but its presence still loomed over him like a storm cloud. "They'll come for us," Lieutenant Jarek said, breaking the silence. He stood rigid, his broad frame tense, his voice filled with certainty. That man, Dax, he wasn't making a threat. He was stating a fact. Zarek turned sharply to face him, his pride flaring against the creeping dread. "We don't know that," he snapped. "We don't even know what he wants. For all we know, he's the last of his kind, a relic with no army to back him up." Dr. Corvin, seated at his station, shook his head. "If he's a relic, he's a powerful one. That ship alone is a fortress, Captain. The technology, his presence, it's beyond anything we've encountered. We need to warn the Coalition and tell them what?" Zarek shot back, his voice rising. "That we ignored the rule? That we woke something we couldn't control? They'll strip us of command, imprison us, maybe worse. Better us than the entire galaxy," Jarek interjected, his tone unyielding. "If we stay silent, this will escalate. You saw what he's capable of. Imagine what happens when the others wake." Zarek clenched his jaw, the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. For all his arrogance, for all his defiance, he had never envisioned this outcome. He had wanted answers, power, something to justify his ambition. Instead, he had unleashed a force that might unravel the fragile balance of the galaxy. The ship jolted violently, throwing the crew off balance. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as Corvin's claws flew over the controls. "We're being pulled out of hyperspace," he shouted. "Something's locking onto us." The Elysian was yanked from its jump, thrust back into normal space with a sickening lurch. Ahead of them, the human vessel loomed, its sleek, ominous form filling the viewport. It had moved faster than they thought possible, cutting off their retreat with precision. A deep, resonant voice filled the bridge, vibrating through the very walls. It was Dax. "Running will not save you. It will not save anyone." Zarek's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling further. "How? How did he track us so quickly?" he muttered, half to himself. Corvin's voice was grim. "He's not tracking us. He's anticipating us. His technology, his mind, it's years, perhaps centuries ahead." Dax's voice came again, colder now. "You brought this upon yourselves. You woke me. And now the galaxy must face what it has forgotten." The screen flickered, and Dax appeared, his image towering over the bridge. His expression was calm but unyielding, his piercing gaze cutting through them all. "For centuries, we slept to give the galaxy peace. Not because we were weak, but because we understood our strength. You violated that peace." Zarek forced himself to speak, though his voice wavered. "We didn't know. We thought you were gone. Legends." Dax's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "Legends have a way of becoming real when you're foolish enough to chase them." His expression hardened. "Do you think the galaxy is ready for humanity's return? Do you even comprehend what you've done?" Jarek stepped forward, his posture defiant despite the odds. "If you blame us, then hold us accountable. Don't punish the rest of the galaxy for our mistake." Dax studied him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You would sacrifice yourselves to protect them?" he asked, his tone almost curious. Jarek nodded firmly. "Yes. They don't deserve to pay for what we've done." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Dax's face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Noble," he said, his voice edged with disdain. "But it changes nothing. The Coalition's weakness invited this. Your arrogance ensured it." Corvin, his fear momentarily overshadowed by desperation, interjected. "You don't have to do this. Humanity once chose peace. You can choose it again." Dax's gaze shifted to the scientist, his expression unreadable. "Peace?" he repeated, as if tasting the word. Peace was an experiment, one that ended the moment you disturbed it. The ship shook again, and Corvin's console flared with activity. "He's overriding our systems," he said, his voice frantic. "We're losing control." Dax's voice boomed, final and unrelenting. "This is no longer your concern. Return to your coalition. Warn them if you wish. But know this. Humanity is awake, and the galaxy will never be the same." The connection severed, and the human vessel vanished, leaving the Elysian adrift. The silence on the bridge was deafening, the weight of Dax's words suffocating. Zarek slumped into his chair, his mind racing with the implications. Jarek broke the silence, his voice steady but grim. "What now, Captain?" Zarek looked up at him, his eyes hollow. "We warn them," he said quietly. "We tell them everything." Corvin turned from his console, his expression resigned. And then Zarek didn't answer. He didn't know. But as the Elysian's engines hummed to life and the ship set a course for Coalition space, one thing was clear. The galaxy's era of peace had ended. Humanity had returned, and with it, the question that now loomed over them all. What would happen next?